How's everybody doing? All right. We're going to stray a little bit from what I normally do with these streams, rants, whatever you might call them. I'm going to talk about heredity, about your possible ancestors, your link to your past, or possibly where you come from. Hello. Hello again. Morning, afternoon, evening, late at night, whatever you're doing while you're watching this. Hope all is good. As I said, we'll do something different. Normally, I delve in the I don't say nonsense, but just maybe the drama or the foolishness of the world at times. But today we're going to get in a little bit about uh, heredity lines, your ancestor lines. Everybody, I mean, most of everybody is fascinated about where they came from, who they derive from, what countries their ancestors or relatives might have ventured from before coming to the United States, because unless you have indigenous heritage, everybody from this country came from somewhere else. That's just how it is. There's nothing political or nothing stupid about that. That's just facts. I mean, the only people that were here were the indigenous, and they were ones that came over from what was it, when they had that ice block from Russia to Alaska. What was about 20,000 years ago or so, maybe longer. I'm not exactly sure. But anyways, so there's a lot of different sites out there that you can use as far as family tree. So I will put this up there with a bit of an asterisk or a bit of a grain of salt to this. Now, the different websites you go to, it's not like there's somebody out there that is just gathering information that is qualified, I should say, for your specific family. Now you can pay people to do that. Don't let me dissuade you from that. I mean, you can pay people to do that, of course. But on these online sites, it's normally done by just everyday individuals. Um, so the information you get from them depends on the individual that has done the research. It could either be really well done research, whereas they have documentation, either regarding the birth records, death records, immigration records, marriage records, and so on, that are on the site that you can actually link to your said relative and or ancestor. So when you do these things, definitely research the site before you get started on it, and also review the different maybe hints or the documentation that you get, because again, different people will have different dates for a lot of different things. I myself, I use Ancestry and their family tree building. Now, what I will say with theirs is they do have when you add somebody to your tree, sometimes the next link up, it'll be highlighted in a green of individuals that they think could be the father and mother of that individual, which is fine. Sometimes, I'd say most of the time, it's correct, but every now and then, it's not. Every now and then, the mother on it might be wrong, or the father on it might be wrong, or both of them might be wrong. So before you go ahead and add that individual onto the tree, you want to look at the hints on the one that you had already established, because a lot of times, I mean, you can get a list of one or two or up to 15 different hints of what other people have gathered and added to that individual's history, um, that may determine that, okay, yeah, those are the mother and father of that individual, or no, actually, that's not. The ones that are the ones that are in all these hints. Um, I found myself sometimes, I mean, sometimes you can get cross eyed, just confused doing this stuff, where you would have an ancestor or relative. You'd have the husband and wife, and then you'd have the husband's um, parents come up there, and they'd be on there, and you'd make sure it was correct. But then the wife, as it was added into the tree, would have the same last name of the husband. So when you would look up, or when the green highlight would come up of the mother and father, it would be the mother and father of the husband. Now, having said that, I mean, some people might look at that and go, well, I mean, there's a lot of outcomes that could come from that. One is the computer is just reaching from the resources that it has, and it's associating the last name with the mother and father of the husband. So you need to check in there and make sure. Is there a possibility that it could be they were brother and sister and they were incest? I mean, depending on how far back you go, that is a possibility. But in most of these cases, it's taking the mother and father of the husband and projecting it onto the wife just because they now have the last name of the husband. So you definitely need to double check that because otherwise you're just creating a tree line that basically goes the same way and you are not actually connecting to other parts of your family. And as I say that too, if you put the wrong ones in there, you are basically making a false tree that is giving you information that has nothing to do with your family line. So you'll definitely want to review hints and everything that you can on these trees. Now, having said all that, my journey it goes on my father's side because my mom's side they immigrated from France and Germany. Um, and you can only go so far back with French and German records before it just stops. And a lot of that has to do with records being lost due to the wars, different, uh, I mean, you could say revolutions or you could say takeovers in the government. You have a lot of stuff that just disappears. So on my mom's side, it only goes back about 5 or 6 generations that you can find before the hints and everything just stop. But my dad's side was different. Now, growing up, I mean, I'd always known that his parents, my grandmother and grandfather, were from the New England area. My grandmother would talk about Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, having, kind of family up and through that area. My grandfather was lived in like upstate New York, I think in like Youngstown, around those areas, or Middletown. I can't remember, somewhere around there. One of the small towns, not the city, but one of the small towns outside. So we always had this New England link. Now we never like would officially know or how or where it went. Now my grandmother on her side would talk about how um, we were related to Ethan Allen, who was an American Revolutionary general from Vermont. I believe Vermont. I could be wrong because the Green Mountain Men, if I remember right, are the and she would talk about also that we had some indigenous heritage, and that there was possibly that the rumor in our family was that there was a chief. Now she, for some reason, thought it was Cherokee, which of course that I mean most people in this country when they say that they're related to a Native American population, they always say Cherokee. You never hear anything else but Cherokee. Um, so I did find out that we were actually related, that we do have ancestors that were indigenous, but they were not Cherokee. They were actually the Wampanoag, the indigenous tribe that helped the pilgrims that were there basically helping the pilgrims survive. So my ancestral line on her side goes back to that, and actually one of our ancestors was actually a chief of one of the tribes or the tribe of that of that culture, which was fascinating to find. Now, in doing that, I kind of let a little bit slip there. Um, there's a pilgrim link. So we had never been officially told, or there was never any rumors that we were related to anybody that came over on the Mayflower. So in doing this, I had no knowledge that would be a possibility. In doing the research and in doing the connection, I actually found out that not just on my grandmother's side, but on my grandfather's side, we are and were and are descendants of, I mean, up to about 12 or more members of the Mayflower that came over in 1620, which was a mind blow. And it's one of those things, as you'll see as I go through this, it's interesting the connection on it, because here you have my grandmother and grandfather who met when they were in their 20s, um, back in the early 40s, 1940s, just happened to randomly run into each other, at some event in some town somewhere. And little did they know that their families actually came over together on the Mayflower, and on some level were intertwined, and then it just, as family trees all do, it spread out to different levels, and then just happened to come back together later, 350 years later, whatever it may be. So that is it, a wild tale. But to get into that, let me pull this down a little bit. We'll start off with the first member on here that I have, and it starts with John Alden. Now, as you can see, he came over on the Mayflower. He's a direct bloodline. Um, he was the Mayflower Compact, which is basically all the men that came over on the Mayflower signed the compact, saying that they would all agree to live by specific guidelines, specific rules, and everything like that. Um, he was also, as you can see, the founder of Duxbury, Massachusetts, treasurer of the Plymouth Colony, member of the Council of War, assistant to the governor of the colony at that time. On here, I'm pretty sure I'll have to look at the profile. It has him as my ninth great grandfather, and it'll show you the line as it comes down. Um, he then had a daughter, Rebecca, um, who then had a son, and it keeps going down. Or she got married, and then they had a son. So let's go back to the tree so we can show the links to that, because that might get confusing. So you have oh, did I just lose it? Give me 1 second here to pull it back up. It shifted to. All right. So yeah, you go. It starts with John as he came over. Him and Priscilla Mullins, who also came over on the Mayflower. They had a daughter, Rebecca. She ended up marrying Thomas Delano. They had a son, Jonathan Delano, who married Doty. Now, remember this name right here, Doty, because this will also come back as a trail to an ancestor from the Mayflower. They then had a son who married Ruth Sampson, who also has an interesting lineage. They then had a daughter, Sylvia, who married Solomon Walker Jr., who they then had a daughter, another Sylvia Walker, who married a Robert Thompson, who they then had a daughter, Rachel Mary Thompson, who married a John Dunnans, who they had a daughter. This would be my great great grandmother, Winifred Gorman, who married George, who they then had, excuse me, my great great, so great two times over is Winifred. They then had a few kids. One of them was my great grandmother, Anna Gorman, who she then married Sherman Sharples, who was my great grandfather. They then had a host of kids as well. One of them was my grandfather, Wayne, who then, of course, married Mary, which was my grandfather. They had my father, Chris, which then goes to me. So the line, as you can see, goes from me, my dad, my grandfather, to his mother, his grandmother, and goes back on up to um, Mr. Alden, who came over. So that is the lineage link of the first of many Mayflower pilgrims, immigrants, whatever you want to say, that came over. So the next one is going to be Hopkins. Now, this guy was a passenger on the Mayflower voyage. As you can see, he was assistant to the governor of the Plymouth colony. He has a son, Giles, who marries Catherine Weldon. Now, the Weldon is where it traces back to me for the indigenous individuals, and I can pull that up later. But this is the link to the indigenous tribe of which I'm also relation to, because her father also came over on the Mayflower um, and married a indigenous Wampanoag. I'm pretty sure that's the name. I could be wrong. And so she was the daughter of a pilgrim and an indigenous tribes person. So they then have a child, Abigail Hopkins, who marries Willem Merrick. They have a son, Nathaniel, who marries Alice Freeman, who they then have a daughter, Ruth, who marries Thomas Hinckley. Uh, Hinckley then Ruth have a daughter, Mercy, who is married to Job Dexter. And this is actually the lineage that I sent into the Mayflower Society. For those that don't know, if you have a link back to the Mayflower, you can join their society, which there's some benefits to it. If you want to know what the benefits are, I suggest you look them up. Um, Besides that, you just, you basically you'll get a certificate showing that you have a link to the Mayflower, that you have a direct connection to the first people that migrated to America, and well, I shouldn't say the first people, the first successful colony to kind of set up in America, because there were other individuals that landed on the American continent, and their colonies just didn't were not successful in, or um, did not carry on. So this would be the first. This would be the first successful colony that basically led to the United States being developed, or formed. So yeah, Dexter and Ruth then had a daughter, who Carissa married Clarissa, who married Henry Goss, who then they had a daughter, Clarissa. That happens a lot. You have just names being transferred down, who married Fina Parker, Finia. I can't pronounce the name. I apologize. Sorry to my relative. Okay, who then they had a daughter, Isabel, who married Hiram Dickinson. Now, this name here, Dickinson, you might recognize as well. This is my lineage to Emily Dickinson, the famous poet. We share a relative, like the Dickinson. It goes back to a great grandfather who leads to this, who was also, I believe, an offshoot of him. So I think I looked it up, and I believe, like, in a weird way, like Emily Dickinson would be like a great niece of mine. I don't know how that happens in the line, but that's what it came up as I looked it up. So this, yeah, this breaks off to an Dickinson that's way off, that separates from my tree. It's not a direct link to me, but her one of her great grandparents is shared with me, great grandfather. So that then goes down to Nellie Dickinson, who married Dennis Donahue. They have a daughter, Doris Donahue, who married Wallace Jones, who they then had Mary Jones, who was my grandmother. So this would be my great grandparents, who married my grandfather, who then had my dad, who then lineages down to me. So that is the second link to ancestors on the Mayflower. And again, as you can see, with these links here, there comes a little tab on which these hints. If you're doing this, and if you're looking up or trying to discover where your lineage is on that, use these hints and look at all of them. Make sure they all match up, because again, you have some people that do a really good job on finding these links, and others that don't. And I've taken most of these with a grain of salt, and or the possibility that they could be wrong. There is a possibility that these could be wrong. There's always that possibility. But I think I've spent about a month and a half making sure that most of these and all these are correct, and so far I cannot find any um, miss family ad or any false information that would lead me astray. So as of right now, this is all correct, but it could be wrong. So always double check. Always make sure all your hints are correct before you add somebody to your tree. So my third one is going to be William White. As you can see, he was also a signer of the Mayflower Compact. Um, Him and his wife Susanna, which I need to fix the last name on that so I can get that moved up. They had a son named Resolved White, who married a Judith Vassal. They had a daughter, Anna, who married a John Hayward. They had a daughter, Judith, who married a Philip Goss, who they then had a son, which was another Philip, who married a Kiza Cooley. That is a cool name. They then had a son, another Philip, who married a Hannah Ball, who married a Hannah Ball. This Ball connection is also interesting. Most people, when they look at the last name Ball, it doesn't really do anything for them. This lineage actually goes back to George Washington, and you're probably asking how. So on this lineage, a great great grandfather, I believe it's Thomas Ball. Let me look this up real quick because I wrote it down. Um, Maybe I didn't write it down, but there is a Ball on there who, and I don't want to get his name wrong because I did write it down, but I completely forgot it. But anyways, so one of my great great grandfathers, last name Ball, his sister went on to be George Washington's mother. So she married a Washington, and their son was George Washington. So along this lineage here, George Washington is a distant relative of mine. Um, so then they then had a kid, John Goss. As you can see, the Goss was strong. They had a bunch of boys in this line who married Irene. They had another Goss son, Henry. Now Henry and Clarissa Allen, and I think this is where my grandma thought the Allen with the linkage to Ethan Allen went, but I didn't. In doing this, there wasn't a direct link to Ethan Allen. Maybe I just haven't, misread maybe the name or something attached to it, but I think this is the link she was talking about. They then had a daughter, another Clarissa Strong, who married Parker. And as you can see, the lines start coming in together here because then you have the Dickinsons again, and that comes down to my grandmother married to me. And you're saying, well, wait a minute, these lines are coming together. Well, I mean, how does that happen? It's because you had a lot of individuals from the Mayflower who had kids, and then especially in those early years, I think the Mayflower came over with 120 people on it, and after that first winter, half survived. I think it was around 60 that survived. So you had just a lot of intermixing of families at that point. And I don't think it was for another year. I think 1621, maybe 1622 before the next boat of immigrants came over. So you had just a small pool of people to create families with, to create a future with. So you had a lot of cross mingling of kids of the original pilgrims that would then integrate with other kids, other individuals that were coming over the year and two later, And it just wasn't, I mean, it wasn't like there were thousands of people they could choose from. There was only about 60 people that were left. And so that dwindles your chance down for a mate at that time very, 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 very small. So you had a lot of these trees that'll intersect at times, that'll come together because you might have had somebody who had a kid up here, a kid up here, a kid up here, and then they have other kids and they get together as it goes down. So you'll have trees that'll come in and separate, might come in again and separate, and so on and so on. And it might seem confusing, but once you go through your tree, you realize how it all lines up together. So don't get confused because I sure as hell got confused a few times. All right. So our next one is Henry Samson. Samson, not Sampson, Samson. He was a member, passenger of the Tilley family. So he came over with the Tilleys, which was another family that was a part of the Mayflower. So I think he was either adopted or his was possibly uh, might have been, if I remember the story right, might have been a kid whose parents had died, and the Sampsons either adopted him or brought him over. So he ended up marrying Ann Plummer, and they had a son, James Sampson. Now, the interesting with the Sampsons here, and I believe it's with Abraham. I could be wrong. Um, these are it's an interesting relation here too because these are the ones that I do believe are an offshoot of the Bush family. Okay, so James K. Sampson is I don't think it might not be this particular one. It could be this one. I can't sure, but anyway, the Sampson line is a connection with the Bush family. So I also have a second connection with two former presidents. So that makes three now with George Washington plus the Bushes, Bush Senior and Bush Junior with the Sampson line. So they would be distant relatives as well, like cousins, like very distant. Um, so, anyways, so they then Sarah and James have a daughter, Penelope, who marry another Sampson. I mean, that's just you just have similar names that wasn't any interbreeding. They have Ruth, who meets Delano, which again this then goes down. Some the Delanos you'll see like when it comes to this, I think there's two Delanos that married two different women that trace back to the Mayflower. In because it threw me off at one point. I was like, wait a minute, but there's just like a James Delano and this particular Delano who married different individuals, which traced back to the Mayflower. So they then have a daughter, as you can see, another Sylvia Walker. It comes down with the Donalds. This is where that line came in together as the previous, which then goes to Winifred, my great grandmother, which then goes into my great grandmother to my grandfather's side, and into to my father, then to me. So so far we have um, one with my grandfather, one with my grandmother, two with my grandmother, and then now two with my grandfather. So you have two ancestral lines back from my grandfather and two from my grandmother. So that makes four for me. Where this comes in, and it'll continue to go. As you see, this one will go to my grandfather as well. And this is Miles Standish. He was a compact signer as well. He married Barbara Mullins, who also came over. They had a son, Alexander, who married Alda, who, as you can see, was from this Alden line. So Rebecca is one that falls into my line, and then, whoops, I didn't go find. And Sarah was also from the Alden line. And as you can see, this goes down. Standish goes into Abraham Sampson, and as that line, this is where it also the again, it may look like it. Well, how can you have it just go into to one individual when you have had multiple, or I should say multiple families, when you had not a lot to choose from. You had a lot of intermingling, and so you had a lot of lines that crossed and intersected. And this one goes down some of the same names, and then goes to my grandfather's side as well. So that's three on his side, two on my grandmother's side. Here's the Doty name. Doty was also a compact signer. He had a son, Thomas, uh, who married Elizabeth. They had a daughter named Hannah. And here's the other Delano, the Jonathan, as I was saying earlier. Um, this then, as you can see, goes into the Ruth, and then comes down to my grandfather's side. So even though this adds five links to my grandfather's side with the Mayflower, it's actually it, it's almost a lot of them are an offshoot of the same line. So you had one individual that um married somebody who then that line went up to four other individuals, and it's at that point where it breaks off to where it goes to the Mayflower. Because I mean, I can understand a lot of people sitting here going, well, how is it always going down to the same person? Well, that's the thing. It's like I said, there weren't a lot of people that were left over after that first year, and so as it comes down and shrinks to that one person, you got to remember as it goes up, it expands out. That's one thing that blew my mind, and I didn't really think about when it comes to this. As it takes two people to make you, it takes four people to make your parents, it takes eight people to make your grandparents. So think about that. You're multiplying more and more people up your tree line as you're finding out as the line comes down to you. It's not one of these things that it starts and goes like a solid line. I mean, if it's a solid line, you really need to question your your history and your ancestry if it's just a solid line. Your line is going to start with you, and it is going to expand. It is going to just go huge. Because again, you start off with you. That leads to two people. Those two people lead to four. Those four people lead to eight, and so on and so on. You will, at the end of this, realize that you have, I mean, hundreds of great grandparents, because that's the way the lines work. So it might look confusing, but once you understand and see it, it's not. And believe me, there are times here where I just cross-eyed myself, like, nah, because of what you can get it to. So if you have to, step away from it for a minute and then come back, if you think you're getting lost. Okay, the next lineage is going to be John Thomas Clark. He was the ship's pilot and master mate. So ship's pilot, I don't know why it has a woman's photo on there. That's just whoever saved. They saved that picture with it. So basically, he was a navigator. He basically navigated where they should go. And of course, as many of you, if you don't know, they got lost. Well, I shouldn't say lost. They left late in their journey. They left like late in fall, and it's not the best time in those times to try to go across the Atlantic Ocean because you have the winter storms. And on their way over, they got stuck in probably a nor'easter or just that horrible weather, in that fall weather, not winter, in that fall weather. And so they were supposed to end up in Virginia somewhere, because that's where the land grant was. But they got so off course that they ended up in Massachusetts. So he and I don't know why it says John, but he then ended up having. So this is where this one gets interesting. So they had some kids. He had Thurston, who sailed to America on the ship Francis, so he came over later. Um, and they also had a daughter, Jane, who emigrated over later as well. They did not come over when they first came over. So they then got married and had kids. And see, this is where the Doty one came in from this last one here. This is where the did I go too far? Okay, Standish. Where was Doty? Now I'm getting lost on myself here. Okay, so as you can see, Doty, and there's Doty again. So the Doties, he ended up marrying Faith, and that line then goes down as the one we were just on with Doty. But as you see, this is where it gets interesting. So Clark, his daughter, then married, and they had a daughter, Elizabeth Collier, who married Constant Southworth. They had a daughter, Mercy, and she married Samuel Freeman. They then had a daughter, Alice Freeman, who married Nathaniel Merrick, and we've seen that line before in there. The Hinckley line, and there's Dexter with Ruth, and it goes down and down. And as you can see, this lineage actually goes down to my grandmother's side. So this is where it gets interesting. So you have this common link here, breaks off. The one from this particular one leads down to my grandmother's side, which then leads to my father to me. Now watch this as I pull this up. This one goes to my grandfather's side. So up here, they share a common relative. This individual here, John Thomas, my 11th grade grandfather, would actually be both one of their both of their grandfathers. So my grandmother and grandfather, without any knowledge, share the same relative, which they this was not known until I discovered it on here. And it's one of those things, again, it just blows your mind just how a family starts, expands out, and it's somewhere along the way it came back together. And that's one of those lines where they share a common, which would have been their ninth great grandfather. Um, and just through life, went out separate ways and came back together. So that would probably mean that like my grandfather and grandmother were distant cousins. Like they could trace their family lineage back, but there was enough distance between them to where they weren't actually like they weren't blood related, you could say. And again, that goes into when remember when you were growing up and it was everybody's related to everybody. Everybody, if you do this kind of search, you're going to find out that probably everybody's cousins with everybody. That's just how life is. Now, the just because you might be a cousin with somebody doesn't mean that you're blood cousin with them. There is a distinction in what is like your intermediate family and what would be a distant relation as to, yeah, you share a common relative or ancestor, but on a technical front, you're not like I guess you would say like family. You would be the extended family. So the next one is George Morton. He was a Puritan separatist, member of the Congregation of Separists. Uh, he who became the Mayflower Pilgrims Colony. He became over. He was one of the original separatists that probably went over to Holland and then came over to America. Him and Julia, they had a son who, as you can see, first settler of Amesbury, Massachusetts, George, who married Susanna North. They had a daughter, Hannah, who married Ezekiel, who they then also had a daughter, and they named Hannah, who married a Samuel, half brother of Sir Henry Morgan, as you see. Um, who then they had a Susanna. So they went from Hannah to Susanna, who met John Johns or Jones, as it should be, who they then had a daughter Abigail, who met John Huntington, they had a daughter Mary, who met John Pelesley, and they again had a daughter Mary, who met I don't even know how to Nehemiah. I know that's wrong. Whoever met Heath, who they then had a daughter Sarah Heath, who met Daniel Goodwin, who then they had a daughter Hannah, who married Charles Ramsey, who then they had a daughter, Carrie Ramsey, who met William E. Sharples, who then they gave birth to Sherman Sharples, which would be my great grandfather, then to my grandfather, my father, to me. So it seems like my grandfather probably has more linkage to the Mayflower than my grandmother, but there's a lot there. There's actually others. I do believe that there's others um, that are on here. I could completely be wrong. Um, but I do believe that there's others on my in my family heritage here that are also associated with the Mayflower or came over on the Mayflower. Um, having said that, if you want to know, I mean, finding out that I have links to the first people. Actually, you know what I can do? I can show you the Weldons here, and we can show you the um no, not that. I don't want that up. I hit too many buttons. Let's try that again. Okay. Let's see if it'll let me go up from here. Maybe it won't. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong one. There was one on here. Okay, yes, here we go. So see, Catherine came from Gabriel. So Gabriel was over and married in with an indigenous individual, Margaret. I won't even try to pronounce the name. That's so they obviously they gave her an English name because it wouldn't have fit. So her father was the chief of the tribe. So that is the link that my grandmother had said was that we were related to Native Americans, Indigenous Americans, whatever you might want to call them. Um, this is the link. They are not they were not Cherokee. They were from the as you can see, it is the Wampanoag Massasoit tribe. Now this is the tribe that um, met the Pilgrims and basically showed them how to survive here. Showed them how to basically plant, how to keep your vegetables growing, how to keep things growing. In turn, they had like a truce together to which they would help that tribe fight their enemy tribes, um, and basically keep them off their lands or expand their tribe lands. Now, this is an interesting link because you have the New World starting here with the old world of the New World, and what would be the demise of these people because more and more immigrants would come over and then they would start taking the land of this tribe, the Wampanoags, to the point that they would then have wars and fights with the immigrants were coming over because they were beginning to take the land of these tribal people. So that's an interesting. This is the interesting link right here. These three, the old world and the new world, coming together. But yeah, so there's the chief and um, his father, her great grandfather, was also, I believe, a chief of that tribe, and that's where the linkage is, and that's where the pilgrim with the indigenous tribes link, not just in history, but with my family. So yeah, so again, when you do these, make sure you're using as much information as you can use and find. Um, it is interesting. Like I have found links to a lot of people in history that I did not realize I would have been linked to. And it's one of those things like it's almost like an Easter egg hunt, and you find some of your family line is just a regular line. There wasn't much going on. It was just your regular line dating back to I think the furthest I've gone back on this is the late 1400s on Ancestry, and then it kind of stops. Um, then you'll find one that has links to royalty or has links to an individual who is historic or was a part of history, on some level. Like there is a lot of um, family links, you could say, family ancestors of mine that are involved throughout history. As I was saying, like George Washington would be a very distant cousin. The Bushes are a very distant cousin. A lot of the Pilgrims. I mean, I have the list here. So the Alden individual, some of his descendants, his ancestral descendants were John Adams. He has a link to it. Marilyn Monroe, Dick Van Dyke, Orson Welles, Calvin Coolidge, all link to Alden. Um, FD, you have FDR and the Bushes almost also linked to Tilly and Howland that came over on the Mayflowers. So you might find that you are distant relatives of future of former presidents. I mean, that might be an interesting find. I mean, mine with the Dickinsons, finding out that Emily Dickinson is an offshoot of the family, or that we're an offshoot of her family, one or the other. Um, but yeah, I mean, the links that you might find might blow your mind. It might blow your family's history line. That you might even, I mean, I know there's people out there that there's hundreds of people that claim that there's a family rumor that they are descendants of certain individuals, whether it be Mayflower or royalty or presidents or whatever. And a lot of that sometimes ends up not being true. And you might find that in these searches. You might go back and realize that who you thought you were related to, you're not. And that's the point of doing this, is to find the actual truth of your family and to even correct it on some circumstance. Now, there are some 35 million people that are descendants of the Mayflower individuals, the Mayflower pilgrims and strangers, and the crew around the world. So there is a good possibility that you go through this and you find a connection with the pilgrims. Because again, 35 million people, that might not seem like a lot, but that's a lot. That's a lot of people. So say give it a go. Find one of these family tree ancestral websites that you trust, that you believe is giving you the best information. Again, use as much information as you can, even if you have to Google and look for the individual to, if you can find it, do that. But have some fun with it and learn something about not just yourself, but maybe about where your family came from and the good and the bad. I mean, because you might find some bad. I found out I was related to an individual who um, was a big proprietor of the slave trade when it first started. So I have that in my family. He's the only one so far. So far we're doing all right. But yeah, you might find something like that. But it's one of those things. You don't be mad, don't be upset if you find something out that you don't like, or if you find out that there's just nothing that links anything to anybody in your family. And if you do find out that you're linked to somebody, hey man, that's a cool deal. Um, we'll end it there. I went a little longer than I even normally do with my regular podcast. But hey, when you're out there in the world, remember to have a good time. Be great to each other. Let's not be mean. Everybody's going through something. Always look on the bright side of life and find that earth and dig it, man. All right. Until next time. Check you later.